Good afternoon. I'm Darrell West, Vice President of Governance Studies and Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution. And I'd like to welcome you to today's forum on mobile learning, transforming education, and engaging students and teachers. This is part of our mobile economy project supported by Qualcomm, and we are webcasting our event live today. We've set up a Twitter hashtag at TechCTI, that's TechCTI, so if you wish to post any comments or questions during the forum, you're welcome to do so. And during the Q&A, we will try and take questions both from our virtual as well as our live audience. Today's event will focus on how mobile technology is engaging students and teachers. The current period represents one of the most dramatic eras of invention that we have seen in world history. There are lots of exciting new applications that are coming online and many pilot projects that are taking place all around the country as well as around the world. We put out a paper this afternoon on mobile learning, and in it I argue that education is at a critical juncture in the United States. We face major challenges in terms of digital infrastructure, educational content and assessment, and teacher development. Mobile technology represents a way to address many of those issues. Devices such as smartphones and tablets enable innovation and help students, parents, and teachers gain access to digital content and personalized assessment. Irwin Jacobs, who is the founding chairman of Qualcomm, wrote in a recent paper that, quote, mobile devices in the hands of students have the potential to dramatically improve educational outcomes. In my paper, I show examples of how this actually is taking place and why we are on the cusp of major progress in education. So if you haven't picked up a copy, we have copies out in the hallway, and they also are posted online as well. To help us kick off this event, I'm very pleased to welcome Peggy Johnson to Brookings. She is the Executive Vice President of Qualcomm and President of the Global Market Development. She's responsible for commercializing new business opportunities and developing strategic relationships for the company. She oversees Qualcomm Labs, which focuses on new businesses and new products, as well as exploring new market segments. She has worked at Qualcomm for 24 years and held positions in nearly every facet of the company. She's been a leader in bringing to market next-generation wireless technologies for mobile applications and mobile broadcast video. Under her leadership, the company has developed and commercially launched the Brew platform, which has pioneered the world's first large-scale mobile app store, and it's helped developers monetize their applications. And that app ecosystem has generated more than $3 billion in revenue. And for her outstanding performance, she's been recognized by multiple organizations, including Women in Technology International, STEM's Top 100 Women Leaders, and Fierce Wireless's Most Influential Women in Wireless. So Peggy's going to share some of her thoughts regarding the future of mobile learning. So please join me in welcoming Peggy Johnson to Brookings.
Thanks, Darrell, for that very kind introduction. Well, hello, and thank you all for coming today. I want to thank Darrell and the Brookings Institution for taking on this task of exploring how mobile learning is transforming education and engaging students and teachers, and also for convening our esteemed panelists that you'll meet later today. Today we have the opportunity to examine how mobile learning, or M-learning as we like to call it, can profoundly impact the U.S. education system through a couple panels. The first will define the critical issues associated with adoption and penetration, and the second will examine some possible solutions to these barriers. But before we dive into this topic, I just wanted to give you a little background on my company. We invented much of the technology that's in your cell phones that you're holding right now, 3G and 4G technology. We also have the chip inside the cell phones, not just cell phones, but also tablets and e-readers and a variety of other mobile devices. And we, in our period of evolving this technology, we've put more and more of software into that mobile device, and it's power efficient, and you have it on the go with you all the time. And we came to realize that it could have a tremendous impact on the educational space. And for the past several years, using our technology, we've been piloting several programs in this space through our Wireless Reach initiative, and we've really experienced through these programs some very dramatic outcomes. The projects have shown us how we can deliver customized and very relevant curricula to students, provide real-time and proactive assessment right at the moment inside the classroom, enable very collaborative learning inside and outside the classroom, enable mentoring and social engagement, and also allow students to learn from each other. And we believe these are all very valuable 21st century skills and are critical to our global prosperity. Same thing we use every day in our jobs. So today, many of the panelists will highlight the ways in which mobile technology and connectivity are already improving learning and can become a reality in all learning environments. Unlike the hospitals that offer advanced medical care, the high-tech labs where our engineers innovate, or the constantly connected offices where industry leaders transform the business landscape, many classrooms have essentially remained unchanged for the last 100 years. And as we all know, change can be very unsettling. It can be uncertain. But in the 21st century, mobile devices and connectivity are changing kids' lives in enormous ways. We really can't continue to educate them by ignoring the technology, which is so essential to all of us in so many ways. And as a technology innovator, Qualcomm would want to see M-learning take off, similar as it has in other fields, such as in health, telematics, smart grid. And education can, just like those other fields, be impacted very positively. So working together with educational institutions, nonprofits, and other companies who are invested in education, we're aiming to deepen our engagement in this exciting and very important area. Specifically, we've come to learn about 4 different areas that we find will present some challenges to the adoption of mobile in the educational space. And the first is professional development for teachers. We need support and training for teachers to change the way they teach and to learn in this 21st century environment. And the second is infrastructure. Educational infrastructure must shift to the more modern models in order for mobile learning to be successful. The third, digital content and assessment. We need to know how and where a student is learning and understand what educational content to push based on their strengths and weaknesses. And lastly, but very importantly, privacy and security. Schools must be able to filter out any harmful content and also protect students' private data. By addressing these challenges, we believe that learning can transition from the traditional classroom to a 21st century classroom. Finally, let me quickly mention one other important aspect of the next generation mobile learning. I think many of you here today know about the FCC's E-rate program, and yesterday they accepted comments on the E-rate program, and reply comments are due the middle of next month. And in its original mission, this program was a great success. We wired up the schools of America. Right now, going forward, some of the proposals are to continue to do that, but to lay down fiber. And in its current proposals, there's not an element of mobile. And we think that would be a big mistake not to have an element of mobile connectivity, mobile devices in that mix. We strongly believe kids learn 24/7. We learn 24/7. And we would like the walls of the schoolhouse to be virtual and to allow them to continue to interact outside the classroom when they're waiting for the orthodontist, when they're sitting on the bus, with their peer groups, with their teachers. I think we really can't stop now, and we're hoping that the E-rate program can be modernized to cover the mobile broadband connectivity that we think is so essential to a 21st century education. I do realize this is a complicated effort and it involves many stakeholders, but I ask that we look at working together on this to ensure that mobile technology, devices, and tools can increase student achievement and engagement. And with that, let me just say that I'm very grateful to be here today. I'm looking forward to what I know will be a very insightful discussion on the 2 panels, and I thank you all for your attendance here today and your participation. Thanks very much.
So I first want to start by thanking Peggy. We appreciate the leadership that she and her company have demonstrated in this important area. As she mentioned, our forum today is going to consist of two different panels. So our opening panel will look at how to define the critical issues, what are the challenges, how do we overcome those challenges, and then the second panel will examine possible solutions, and we'll have some examples of people who are out there on the front lines actually doing the things that we're talking about and achieving good results with those types of things. I also want to let you know that we will have a reception at the end of the second panel. We will have food and beverages at the back of the auditorium, so any of you who would like to stick around are welcome to do so. On our first panel, we have Chris Deedy, who's the Timothy E. Wirth Professor in Learning Technologies at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. His fields of scholarship include emerging technologies, policy, and leadership. He has funded research grants from the National Science Foundation and the Gates Foundation that design and study immersive simulations, social interactions, and online professional development. In 2007, he was honored by Harvard University as an outstanding teacher, and in 2011, he was named a Fellow of the American Educational Research Association. His latest co-edited book is Digital Teaching Platforms, that was published by Teachers College Press last year. Shirley Malcolm is the head of the Director for Education and Human Resources at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Her responsibilities include programs in education, activities for underrepresented groups, and improving public understanding of science and technology. Dr. Malcolm serves on several boards, including the Heinz Endowment, and is an honorary trustee of the American Museum of Natural History. She has served as co-chair of the National Science Board Commission on 21st Century Education, focusing in particular on STEM issues. She's chaired a number of national committees addressing education reform. She holds 15 honorary degrees and has received the Public Welfare Medal of the National Academy of Sciences, which is the highest award given by the Academy. And our last guest is Dallas Dance, who is the superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools. Earlier, I made the mistake of saying city and was quickly corrected on this front. It's Baltimore County Public Schools. During the past 2 years, he has accelerated activities to prepare for the adoption of the Common Core curriculum. He has restructured his administration to ensure more targeted school support, and he's also defined a trajectory to ensure that his students are college and workforce ready. He has united the Baltimore County Public School students, staff, and community into Team BCPS, which is a force committed to excellence and to producing globally competitive graduates. In collaboration with his team, Dallas has spearheaded the development of Blueprint 2.0, a 5-year strategic plan focused on improving academics, safety, communications, and organizational effectiveness. And this year, just a few months ago, he announced plans to move the school system to a one-to-one digital learning environment. So I think we have three terrific speakers here. I'm going to start with Chris. What do you see as the challenges in the United States in terms of engaging students and teachers with mobile learning?
In discussing any educational technology, you always have to begin with what is the problem that you're trying to solve, because otherwise you have a solution looking for a problem, which is never a good situation. In 2012, the National Research Council released a report called Education for Life and Work. And they asked the question, what do students need to succeed in the 21st century in a global, knowledge-based, innovation-centered economy? It's a very interesting report. And it talks about 3 sets of knowledge and skills that students need that are basically cognitive, intrapersonal, and interpersonal. And interestingly enough, it gives those equal weight, which is certainly not the case typically in our curriculum. And it cites evidence that 10 years after you graduate, your intrapersonal and interpersonal skills actually have more to do with your success than your cognitive skills, even though all 3 are quite important. Anyone who reads that report is immediately struck with the fact that there is no way that the best possible teacher within the school place and the school day can give students those skills. There's simply no way to get from there to here within the confines of the school. And so an interesting problem to consider is, does mobile learning give us ways of addressing the fact that we can't possibly prepare kids for the 21st century with the education system we have now? David Thornburg said that the fundamental problem with educational technology is that we're trying to put a jet engine on a stagecoach. So, what could mobile learning do? Well, it could give every student a device, and using that device, they could have e-textbooks, and the teacher could lecture more effectively, and students could read more effectively. And that would provide a little leverage on it, but frankly, not very much. Every student could have a device, and the teacher could have a device, and they could do project-based learning and different forms of active collaborative learning and making meaning together, and that would give substantially more leverage on these 3 domains that the NRC talks about, but still not enough in the school day and the school place to get the job done. Every student could have a device, and that device could be 3G or 4G connected, and they could take it everywhere that they went in their lives, and they could use it to do their homework and to draw down digital textbooks from the internet and to work on project-based learning. And that would help a little more. But I'm not sure it would really get the job done, because that's a way of making the stagecoach go faster. I think the really interesting question to ask in framing the problem is that mobile learning gives us the opportunity to have the airplane rather than the stagecoach. And it creates the opportunity for a really interesting reversal, where instead of taking our schoolwork out into life and doing our schoolwork in settings outside of the school, what we could do is bring our life work into the school, and to take the kind of intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive puzzles that we see all around us in our communities, in our homes, in workplaces, and get help from people inside of the school in applying academic fields to understanding them. So there's a lot of stories about genies and fairies granting people 3 wishes. And the moral of all those stories is, pick your wish very carefully. Do we want to pick our wish with mobile learning to be automating the conventional model, which is often what we hear? Or do we want to pick it to be innovating to a new kind of 21st century educational structure? That's a big question, and it's also a big dilemma.
So Shirley, you've worked on a number of national committees and commissions. What are the challenges that you see?
Oh, where do you start? I mean, Chris has laid out an incredible challenge in and of itself. But I think that the challenges really range across the fact that we have a very different population of student now in terms of their makeup, but also in terms of their expectation than we were. We have people who are used to a digital environment, and then they go to school and they get shut down. And so you're asking them to kind of go opposite type and opposite what they're comfortable with. In my situation, working in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, I see a need for every student who is in school today to have fluency in these fields in order to be able to be prepared for life and for their life's work, whatever that happens to be. And yet the manifestation of that is not going to be their accessing more information and knowledge about science. It's going to be understanding the practice of science and actually doing the practice itself. And so the inquiry and the need to have authentic experiences in these fields means that we need different kinds of tools. And quite frankly, at AAAS, we have been experimenting with mobile technology and using smartphones for a variety of reasons to actually be able to go out and ask questions of nature and to be able to collect the data and share the data and develop an analysis so that you can begin to really understand what you understand. My colleague Bob Hirschon is going to be talking a little bit about that, but I think the important issue is, why did we do it in the first place using that particular strategy? Number one was the realization that it's going to be a while before we're able to get a device in every kid's hand. So what do you do till the revolution comes? And in our case, the ubiquity of this kind of technology goes over into homes that would be considered low income. And so we have a better shot with something like this than we do with something else, not only in terms of accessing it, but in terms of the utility on the ground with regard to providing authentic experiences. And I do think that this whole question of resources, we can't walk away from it. There is a real question about how we're going to pay for the infrastructure that we really need. I worry about the equity concerns, and therefore we went in this direction. I worry about authentic experiences, so we went in this direction. We made choices that were really explicitly to solve some of those kinds of critical problems, but those remain critical problems. And the other really critical problem, I think, is how are we going to prepare teachers to really be able to use all of this technology in ways that are authentic and positive and where they are in control of a lot more of their own professionalism. And I worry about that, because we always are imagining solutions for teachers without engaging teachers. When you engage teachers, teachers say, well, I have this. I know how to use this. I can build community with this. And so that is really, I think, another aspect. Finally, though, I think that one of the critical issues is that of culture. And that is, are we ready for a learning setting that looks different from what we have? And I'm not sure that we are, because quite frankly, principals are still, I'm sorry.
They put me next to you for a reason.
Principals are still basically making judgments about teachers' about their work in the classroom based on old standards. Are the kids quiet? And what does the classroom look like? The expectation of the teacher standing there, essentially talking to the students, lecturing. I don't know about other fields, but it's not appropriate for science. And it's not appropriate for mathematics, and it's not appropriate for the kinds of experiences that we want kids to have in the way that they need to have them. And so that's a challenge, because the culture has to shift in order to allow the plane to basically take off.
Okay. I like your question about what do you do until the revolution starts. Well, the revolution has started. In Dallas, you're on the front line. So what are the challenges that you're finding in Baltimore?
I am, and I think Peggy and Chris really set it up, and I'm going to sort of piggyback off something that Shirley said. I just don't think that individuals in education, I have this conversation with my colleagues and with our state agencies and really the federal agencies a lot, that we are intending, and our expectation is that we are preparing students for careers that don't exist yet. And so the way we deliver our curricula, the way we even write our curricula, has to in fact change, because we don't in fact know what the future holds for our students. But what we do know, and we've been talking about this for the last 2 decades in education, is that we need kids who are critical thinkers, who are problem solvers, who are innovators, who can collaborate. We've been talking about that, and we're a part of several superintendent groups, education organizations that constantly talk about that. And we talk about this whole notion around personalized learning. And there is no way that you can personalize learning for a student when a teacher has 25 to 30 students in his or her classroom, unless you leverage technology in order to do that work. And so in your comments, you really talked to it, Darryl, but Baltimore County Public Schools has said that with our 108,000 students, we are going to a one-to-one digital learning environment for all of our students. And what we're saying is that in the grades of K-5, it will be one-to-one for students. And in the grades from 6-12, it will be one-to-one, and students will have the opportunity to take that device home and have 24/7 learning environment. What we decided to do as an organization is to figure out really what are our priorities. And so if our priorities is to educate every single student, then we can't just talk about it. All means all has to mean something, it has to be defined. And so what we looked to do is we said, you know what, we're not going to go out here and purchase devices. And I have several conversations with my colleagues and across the country who are in fact taking that route. Even if I had the money to do that, I would not take that route. I think in order to make sure that it's going to work, that it's sustainable, and that it's meaningful for any school system across our country, large or small, you have to fundamentally change how you deliver curriculum. And so what we're doing in Baltimore County is we're starting with our curriculum first. And so it's really teed up exceptionally well for us because Maryland is one of our states around the country that's adopted the Common Core state standards, which really calls for us to fundamentally change how we deliver English language arts and mathematics. So as we're doing that, we're bringing in teams of teachers, and we're actually writing our curriculum through a digital platform. And so because it's being written through a digital platform, we're actually in some cases forcing all of ourselves to deliver it through a digital platform. Now what we realize is that change is scary. And so what I've realized as a superintendent is that when our teachers come to Baltimore County, the good thing is they stay. They don't want to leave. So what we have to do, to Shirley's point, is we have to create a culture and an environment where teachers feel protected to think outside the box. And so as opposed to allowing students to power down when they get to school because we think that's what they're doing, when we know they're not. You know, our students are so brilliant, they're texting underneath the desk, they're looking up, they're finding information prior to a teacher even asking the question. So as opposed to creating cultures where you're saying, I'm coming in looking at it, there's an objective on the board. I'm coming in looking at how innovative your students are and how innovative you are in delivering that content to your students through digital content, but through a digital delivery service. So what we have in Baltimore County right now, and I'll end with this, is what we call our 7 conversions. And what we've said very clearly is that one conversion can't be going fast-paced while the other one is going slow-paced. We have to literally monitor and make sure all 7 are going along at the same time. The first 4 conversions, and we all know this in education, is curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development. Peggy hit it right on the head. If you don't actually prepare teachers for the change that you in fact want to make in your classrooms and your schools, it's not going to take legs and it's not going to fly, even if it is a plane. So curriculum, instruction, assessment have to change all at the same time while you're delivering professional development, not just for teachers, but also for principals. So as we have our new teacher and principal evaluation systems that are all coming into play because Maryland was a race to the top state, we're designing evaluation systems around the classrooms that we want the future to actually look like. The last 3 conversions that really go with this work is our policy conversion. Because there's a student acceptable use policy, there are employee acceptable use policies, and as Peggy said, the filtering has to be in place to protect our young people, not just with access to content, but also through their information as well too. There has to be an infrastructure conversion that takes place, and in Baltimore County, over 80% of our schools are more than 40 years or older. So as we look at our infrastructure adjustments, we're looking at really what is the wireless connectivity that exists in all of our schools. Yes, we're correcting it as we modernize, renovate, and give additions, and even build new schools. But for our current stock of schools and our infrastructure, we have to make sure that the wireless connectivity is in fact there. Because if you're going to tell teachers to step outside their comfort zone and try something, it better work. Because if it doesn't work, they're going to convert back. And I don't blame them. They're going to convert back to what they know, in fact, will work. And last but not least, for us, we have to go through a budget conversion. So in Baltimore County Public Schools, we have a $1.3 billion operating budget. Now, I don't want you to think here that I have that money in my pocket. That's a lot of money. But we operate 173 schools, and we have over 19,000 employees and 108,000 students. Like most school systems across the country, 85% of that budget goes to personnel. But what we also know is that we have a large textbook budget. We have a large instructional supply budget. We have a large instructional resource budget. And we also have a technology budget that is centrally controlled, but also controlled out in schools as well too. So we're going line by line of our budget and figuring out if this is what's important for us to accomplish the goal of globally competitive graduates, what do we stop doing, and how do we actually alter dollars a little differently? But what we've done differently, too, is that we've engaged our elected officials, we've engaged our community, and as opposed to it being a Baltimore County Public Schools initiative, it is a Baltimore County initiative. And so we're excited that our Governor, Martin O'Malley, has created a Digital Learning Innovation Fund that we've applied for funds through it, as the Department of Education has had their Race to the Top funding in which they have allocated and asked districts to apply. We're working on that work as well. So we're saying our priorities are most important with digital learning. We're going to create the pathway in order to make that happen for our students and our families. Because the last thing, and Shirley's exactly right, is the equity piece. And so we're working with our community partners, particularly with the Baltimore County Education Foundation and our Baltimore business partners, to figure out how do we make sure we level the playing field when students are at home. And that's the next level of the work.
Okay, let me throw out a question to each of you, and any one of you wants to jump in can do so. So Dallas mentioned the importance of assessment. What are the mobile initiatives that appear most promising that each of you have seen? Chris, you want to start?
Well, one of the interesting opportunities that computers in general give us with assessment is collecting second-by-second information on what a student is doing. And this solves a huge problem that teachers face, which is if you're doing active learning and you have those 30 students and they're each doing something different and they each need something different, there's no way for the teacher even to judge what students need. But if we have those log files, it's the opposite challenge. It's too much information. It's intellectually indigestible amounts of information. And so people like myself in the research community wake up at 3 in the morning trying to think about how we aggregate, filter, cluster, and shape that information to the point that the teacher gets something that they can actually use. But the chance to personalize comes from the technology being a partner with the teacher that provides not summative assessment data at the end of the year that says, well, too bad, you failed this child, but diagnostic assessment data every day that's formative for instruction that lets us at the end of the year say, we don't even need that high stakes test because we know how well our children have done every day. And because we were informed all the way along, they're doing a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but that's not usually the way that people think about assessment. They think about the number at the end of the year. They don't think about the fact that getting the numbers all along and trying to discern the patterns of incorrect responses or things like this is really very useful in terms of the teaching process itself. And I think that's really the thing that excites me most, because there is the opportunity not only to look at an individual student and to see where an individual student may have gone astray, but there's also the opportunity to look across the entire group of students and say, oh, I didn't teach that as well as I should have. I need to go back and revisit this because too many students didn't get it. And so there is this opportunity, I think, to have a very different way of looking and thinking about assessment. But the other part for me is that in the next generation science standards, where we have like 3 different pillars that we're looking at, the kind of the practice, science practices, the content, and then the cross-cutting, the overarching themes, I don't even know how you would even be able to get at some of the practice things without being able to look at the technology. And and I think that it holds some interesting possibility for the researchers and the developers to start getting at some of these other bigger ideas, not just do you know the content, but can you use the content? Do you know how to actually practice the particular science practices, and how do these things connect together? So it can begin to look at some of those other aspects that we think of as being valuable in instruction and in learning.
So Dallas, what are the most promising mobile initiatives that you're seeing?
You know, I think it goes back to what's our definition of assessment. And so Shirley's exactly right, and Chris, you nailed this too. Traditionally, we've thought of assessment as the end of the school year, paper pencil test, that's multiple choice, that actually just reports one defined score. And what we've done is, because we've looked at that and defined it in that manner, we have our parents in our communities who view that as success or failure. And so what we're trying to do is to really figure out this idea around what are true formative assessments. And how do we make sure that we work with our teachers and train our teachers that formative assessment occurs daily. Great teachers do formative assessments daily, and in many cases without even knowing it, but you know exactly where your kids are at every single moment. But what we're doing is we're trying to figure out, and to your point, Daryl, is how do you leverage mobile technology to really make sure that the assignments you give students are differentiated enough to make it personalized for them. So I give the example when I go around a Patapsco High School in Baltimore County Public Schools. And in Patapsco High School, what they have done is they've embraced, and this is one of the outliers, we're making it system-wide, but under strong leadership, Patapsco High School embraced mobile learning. And so what they said was, as opposed to telling students to put your phones away when we know they still have them, we want you to use them. And what you see teachers doing is you're now actually using mobile devices to engage students around the different personalized assignments that actually can measure student learning. So you will walk into a science classroom, and you'll literally see QR codes all around the room. And based on the QR code that really matches the answer that's to a certain science problem or experiment that you've been working on, you actually have to scan the QR code, which actually links right to your teacher. So your teacher, in some cases, have used an interactive whiteboard through QR codes that are actually assessed with students' mobile devices. What you see is that what we have to train ourselves now as educators, and I was fine when I went into the classroom, but to the elected officials who were with me, they said, why is there so much noise going on in this classroom?
Yes.
And immediately once you hear the noise, you want to go into that classroom. But once they got into it, they were so excited because as they talk to students, usually you'll ask a student, tell me what you're working on. The student will respond. The students were so into it that as we were asking them questions, they were bothered. They wanted to get back to exactly what they were working on. So what we've really worked with is as we're building our curriculum, as we're building the resources and potential assignments that should be in them, and what we're telling our teachers, we want you to go out here and find assignments, but we also want some best practices. What are some exemplars that will be used as good assignments to give students? They're really individualized. So while you might give your students a project, how Dallas does it might be completely different from how Shirley does it, and that's okay. What you want Dallas is to think about how he might actually solve that problem, which will be completely different from how Shirley solves that problem. But what we've been doing is we've been able to leverage the mobile devices from what kids are in fact doing and use Patapsco High School and other schools that we have in our school system as we build the next level of systemic work around it.
Okay, why don't we move to questions from the audience? We have people with microphones in the back, so if you have a question, just raise your hand, give us your name and your organization. We have a question up front here. So just tell us who you are and your question.
I'm Juliana Pare-Blagoya from SERP Institute. Thank you all very much. I have a question about the data analytics end. There's one place for data analytics and formative assessment, helping teachers to understand where their students are today. There's another place, and I wonder if you could comment on it or think about how it's working in your own work, where data analytics can be used to analyze the past student work and predict what are the key problem areas that always come up for students when they take this particular course. What are the key things that kids always get wrong? It's something that a veteran teacher would be able to tell you, but a novice teacher wouldn't. Data analytics gives us the possibility to data drive that, and it could be useful for your teachers who have to design curricula. It can be useful in interpreting the formative assessment data that people get. But I wonder if you could comment a little bit on mobile technology and that forward approach for data analytics.
You want to take that one, Chris?
Sure.
As a researcher.
Predictive analytics is one of the big success stories outside of education, whether you go to Amazon and buy books or whether you buy car insurance or a variety of things throughout life. There's predictive analytics in the background. Predictive analytics for learning is much tougher than any of those other forms of predictive analytics, unfortunately. And so it's taking people a long time to understand something as complicated as individual learning and then how we apply predictive analytics to that. And I think the points that you make are very good about not just picking up a problem that a student has on a particular day with a particular kind of problem, but asking deeper questions about what is the student's overall pattern of thinking and doing, and are there opportunities there for the teacher to intervene and to make things better. But I also think that the person who understands least often about us is ourselves. And reflecting those patterns to students can be even more powerful than reflecting them to teachers. And I think that one of the lost opportunities that we have with the different kinds of diagnostic information that we have even now and the more powerful kinds that we have in the future is to push back out to students, to hold a mirror up to them and see, this is what we see, this is what you see. How does that help you think about yourself and your own learning? Shifting the ownership, shifting the responsibility for some of this. And mobile devices provide a very powerful way of giving students representations that can help them with that understanding.
To just piggyback a little bit on what Chris is saying, our school system has the Department of Accountability and Performance Management, which on the system-wide, I think we do a really good job. Personalizing it for individual teachers in terms of training is what we have to work on. And I think that most school systems across the country, if they were honest, would in fact tell you that. So at the end of the school year, as we get our summative testing results back, as we have our formative testing results throughout the year, we use those data points in which you're speaking to actually rewrite, redesign, and actually try new curricula for kids for upcoming years or for upcoming quarters. What I've seen has been best is schools with strong leadership, where actually teachers are working with students to track their own mastery in standards and tracking their own mastery as they move along the continuum of teaching the curriculum. So I can give the example of my visit to Southwest Academy, where you would go into a math classroom, and as they're in 7th grade math and they're looking at 7.A, which might be exactly looking at integers, students actually know where they are on it, and as opposed to the teacher tracking to figure out where every single student is, every single student through their own interactive notebook is tracking their success on that standard. And so literally what I've seen students do now, as I went back to Southwest Academy, is that there's an app that a student at Patapsco High School has created that students can download to their mobile device that will actually allow them on their phones to be able to track their actual success around standards. But again, I think that's the sort of exceptions. What we're trying to do is figure out, because it's happening all across our country. Students are creating apps every single day. I think as we're seeing sort of those exemplars, we're trying to figure out now, how do you scale it to make it systemic wide? But I think what you're talking about, research departments for school systems do it for the system, but in terms of personalizing for kids, I want more examples of what Southwest and what Patapsco, in fact, are doing.
I think we have another problem, and that is in the education of future teachers. How do we begin to give them some of this at that point, so that, as one of my friends once said, we don't have teachers coming in immediate need of a 50,000-mile tune-up. That essentially we are incorporating those aspects into the way that they are being prepared. And I do think that this remains a challenge. Put that on the challenge list.
Okay.
To Shirley's point, I'd love to speak to that, because school systems across the country know where they're getting their teachers from. And so what we've tried to do is look at this sort of twofold. One, we have our current teacher corps and principal corps that we have to figure out how do we actually train them up as we're actually changing how we do business. The other thing, too, though, is that we know in Baltimore County Public Schools, Towson University is our biggest supplier of teacher ed candidates. And so what we've done is we have the good relationship with Towson University School of Education, and we've excited now that Nancy Grasmick, who used to be the state superintendent from Maryland, now is a presidential scholar with the School of Education. One of the good things for me is that Dr. Grasmick served on my transition team as I became superintendent. And what we've said is let's design a School of Education program for future teachers for Baltimore County Public Schools. And so as we're designing that work, which we're looking to do over the next year, we're actually going to have coursework that actually is taught by Towson and taught by Baltimore County Public School employees that actually will train our teachers on what they can experience once they get out. So we're looking to excite folks before they even get into our doors. But we know that as we're training new teachers, we're going to actually have folks who are understanding how we do business and sort of drink the Baltimore County Kool-Aid prior to even becoming full-time employees.
Okay. Right here in the front row, we have a question.
My name is Bonnie Bracy Sutton, and right now I'm working with wiredsafety.org. My question is this: how do we get rid of the fear that people have about using technology because of things that they hear, like school board snoops and reads all the kids' emails. I'm sure you saw that from Glendale. Or teachers don't know enough. I was at Baltimore County doing computer science this summer. People don't understand that you don't have to be 12 to learn. Help me understand how we help the public to understand and get rid of all of the junk that makes people frightened.
So I look at this all around, Shirley hinted this, I look at it all around culture. I think for us, we had to do two things. One, we've had to build a culture where folks understand the direction we're going, but they feel safe in order to try and be innovative. The second thing, too, which is also extremely huge, is the whole community awareness piece. Because I encounter folks all the time who will say, you know what, I learned with the textbook, give them a textbook, which is much cheaper, and they'll be okay. And so as a superintendent, I actually have to make sure that not only myself, but our staff and our community really understands why we must move to this direction. Now, at the same time, we have to make sure that we have pretty sound policies around student protection and employee protection. Now, I'm going to tell you, I used to work in a school system that really went one-to-one, was the first in the country to go one-to-one in grades 6-12. You probably know the school system in which I'm referring. And one of the things we realized is that as we upgraded our student acceptable use policies and our employee acceptable use policies, it really wasn't our students where we had the bulk of our issues. It was the employees where we had the bulk of the issues. And so what we've had to do now is as we go through our policy conversion, it's a training conversion as well, too, for our teachers, for our employees, and also for our community. You're going to have the outliers. Let's just be honest. You're going to have the outliers. But with students, once they actually become familiar with the device, it's no more, it's a novelty for them then. It becomes something in which the way they do business. And our students are already using these devices. So as opposed to writing policies and telling students what you can't do, how do we reverse that and actually show students how to use it responsibly? Because we know that as we're looking at cybersecurity, which is being one of the biggest employable areas right now, if we don't teach students how to actually have a responsible digital footprint now, we're going to have students not able to get security clearances. We have employees every single day who we don't hire because of something they've done with their digital footprint. We have that responsibility to create those types of students now.
Okay, right there's a woman with her hand up.
Good afternoon. I see a lot of friends in the audience, on the stage and in the audience. I'm Dr. Ronnie Lowenstein, and I've been involved with promoting technology, particularly for the underserved, for many years, and pioneering STEM education as a national imperative in 2004. I really appreciate so much of what has been said. And there are two things that I keep on wondering about that I'm concerned that I hear, and then something that I haven't heard. What I hear, and I so much appreciate having a leader who seeks to change the culture. And everything you said really thrills me. But you kept on saying delivering curriculum. And to me, that may seem minor, but it really is major. If we're going to work in the 21st century and prepare kids, and Secretary Riley had said it years ago about preparing kids for the jobs that we don't know, et cetera. We're not delivering instruction. We're not delivering curriculum. We're creating learning environments. And I think that we need to think about that. And since you are so with it in changing culture and working with the elements in a system, let's look at the unlimited possibilities and the goals and try to get rid of some of that language that represents the old world. And so that's something I heard, and I thought, I love so much of what you're saying, but this delivery of instruction disturbs me. What I did not hear, and I'd like to ask everybody on the stage, I'm working with Astra as their senior advisor and futurist. Shirley was a founding member of Astra, and that's a coalition to support science, technology, research for America that's expanded into research policy and practice. In any case, we wrote a book that just got published and was at the U.S. STEM Institute in Austin called EdTech Revolution 2013 in Education 2013. And what happened as we began to write it and get participation of 98 people from around the world, we found that we were moving in a future-focused global direction. And I haven't heard, and we see and I'm sitting next to a man who's doing mobile applications for the global good. And we are living in these unique times where technology has fomented revolution and a reimagining of learning. What can we do to really harness the mobile technologies for the global good and make it the global? And I haven't heard anybody talk about the importance of that. Could you respond, please?
Okay, who wants to start first on? I'll start on global. I'll start on global, and that was one of the other reasons actually that we did this. And I mean, when I get off the plane in Delhi, I get better connectivity there, as I do here sometimes. You didn't hear that. Other places do, because they have this same technology, our ability to be able to deliver ideas is very powerful, and you begin to level the opportunities for in many of those countries. The other thing is that many of the countries are going in this direction because of things such as the need for materials in multiple languages, and having access that is much quicker for them to have the materials, to get at the materials, than to have things printed in Europe and then shipped to Africa, for example, as I know of particular examples. So there's lots of opportunities around global, and I think we are all thinking global. Every time we are doing this, we may develop it for a domestic market, but with that in mind, but I think that we are cautiously optimistic that somebody someplace else will be able to pick it up and use it. I know that in some of the materials that we are working on, my colleague here from Science Netlinks with the Verizon Foundation support, that we have international users of that material. And so it's not too far-fetched to think that what we develop for domestic consumption is not, in fact, not always, but in many cases, totally appropriate for use by people in other countries and educators in other countries.
And I'll go back sort of to your first point, which I think is a very, very fair statement when we talk about delivering curricula. What I've been very, very clear with folks is that a school system, in my opinion, lives and breathes by its curriculum. What do you want students to know and be able to do as they matriculate through pre-K through 12 with you? We've done a lot of work around unpacking standards and really talking about what do standards really mean. And so once we have these standards, what are the actual assignments that we want students to be engaged in doing? And that's where the personalization for us is coming in, because we want students to actually, or teachers I should say, to not be handcuffed because this assignment should go with this standard. This assignment should go with this standard. But we've trained them and worked with them to unpack it so it becomes truly personalized for students. Now I'm so excited that Shirley answered that first. As opposed to me, because one of the things, if you go to our website and you look at our Blueprint 2.0, which is our strategic plan, our theory of action really calls for digital learning environments, but it also calls for access and opportunity to learning a world language prior to graduation. And so what we're doing is we're leveraging technology in order to be able to do that. Now, most school systems across the country, their world language experience for students, and we know this, it starts in middle school. Yeah. And in some cases, we have students who know more about that country than some of our teachers know at that point, because students have already begun researching it when they're in elementary school. We're leveraging the pre-K, K1 and 2 opportunity for students to actually make it more global, where we actually have elementaries right now who are Skyping all the time with classes in India, in Finland, in China, where actually we've expanded our exchange program for students that actually allows more high school students to go and actually spend a month in another country. We want to actually get that experience down in elementary school so that middle school world language looks completely different and high school world language is transformed. And so we're putting together plans now, and we're leveraging technology through mobile devices and through tablets and through laptops in order to be able to do that. So we're really, really excited around the future, because while a lot of folks criticize everything that's happening in education right now, you'll hear a lot of folks talk about the standards that are being imposed on us and the evaluation systems that are being imposed on us and new assessments that are being imposed. We're really at a really great time in our country, that every single thing is coming together where we actually have to transform the way we do business. We can't tinker around the edges anymore, and we're really at a good platform in order to make it happen. So with the standards changing, assessments changing, but really with the evaluation changing, because folks want to know, what are you going to hold them accountable for? We're holding you accountable for actually getting our students to think again, to be creative again, to actually problem solve, collaborate again, and to really be innovators. And that's really what we want if we're talking about preparing kids for a century that really we have not been able to do so far.
Chris?
Just stepping back a minute, the most important infrastructure with any educational technology is the human infrastructure. And the most likely thing that's going to limit mobile learning is the old wine and new bottles phenomenon that we see again and again in every aspect of life because we're insufficiently creative with what comes. I think that the real problem with mobile learning is unlearning. The hardest thing that I do as a professional is unlearning. Unlearning the teaching strategies that worked well 10 years ago with a different set of students and a different set of instructional objectives. Unlearning the research strategies that now would guarantee that I was publishing things 2 years behind what people need. Unlearning the outreach strategies that academics have historically tended to use and trying to use things like Twitter and TED Talks and whatever gets it done. And helping teachers unlearn is going to be absolutely crucial for making this technology work. And yet, if I ask myself during my lifetime, what is the single technology that has led to the greatest amount of change in people's lives in the shortest amount of time, it would be mobile.
Yeah.
Mobile has transformed people's lives professionally and personally, so it helped them to unlearn. It helped them to unlearn and relearn. I want to understand how to harness that for education.
Okay, we are out of time on this panel. Our next panel is going to be moderated by Julie Evans. She's CEO of the nonprofit organization Project Tomorrow. They're going to go into greater detail in terms of possible solutions to the challenges that we have identified. But I want to thank Chris, Shirley, and Dallas for sharing your views with us. It's very informative, and we appreciate that very much. Let's give them a round of applause. And we will invite our second set of panelists to come up.
Well, thank you so much, Daryl. What a fabulous first panel. I was taking all kinds of notes. As a segue to this panel, as Daryl mentioned, we are going to be talking about some potential solutions. And in particular, we're going to look at some of the pilot projects that have been funded by Qualcomm's Wireless Reach Initiative. But to sort of make it a seamless segue, or to attempt to make it a seamless segue between the first panel and the second panel, there was 3 big questions that came up in the first panel from the speakers that I thought were so interesting. The first one was Chris kind of started us off with, so what is the problem we're really trying to solve here? Then Shirley took it from there and said, well, are we ready for this major change, either for the solution that's coming or from a cultural standpoint? And then she added that zinger near the end about making sure that we're also thinking about our teacher preparatory programs. Are they ready for this change? All very, very important. And then Dallas kind of brought it home, at least for me, in terms of thinking about at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level, what are the priorities, and do those priorities, are they articulated well in terms of really driving action? I was particularly struck by Dallas's comments about when he's taken some different individuals, I've sort of think maybe he was talking about school board members, into some classrooms, and they were somewhat taken back by the noise. I know that a little bit of a litmus test that I've been using when I've been visiting classrooms around the country to sort of see the depth of the integration of mobile devices is that I will walk into a classroom and I'll ask myself, can I see where the front of the classroom is? Because if I can still see where the front of the classroom is, maybe it isn't as noisy as it should be, maybe it isn't as collaborative as it should be, maybe it isn't as project-based as it should be. So that's sort of my litmus test. So I am thrilled to have the opportunity to work with these fabulous panelists. This is like a friends gathering for me because I know every one of these folks so well. And I will tell you that they have been involved with projects that have been noisy, that have been messy, where when we walk into a classroom or an education setting, we don't know where the front of the classroom is. And so what our job is today here is to share with you some of these possible solutions to really look at some of the lessons learned. So what I want to do is I want to introduce each one of them to you, but then as I do that, I'm going to have them tell you a little bit about the project in particular that we're going to focus in on today. And they have received instructions from me to be brief so that we get to the question part. Okay? So let me start right here with Michael Flood, who is with Gajit for Education. And Michael has been involved with a fabulous project over the last 2 years called Making Learning Mobile. So Michael, tell us a little bit about Making Learning Mobile.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Julie. Thank you to Brookings for having us here today. Making Learning Mobile is a project that was focused on examining the impact of one-to-one tablet deployments within schools in 2 different districts, Fairfax County Public Schools here in the DC area and Chicago Public Schools. Very different environments, different grade levels, different backgrounds and demographics of students, but in both cases keeping kind of a common technology standard of a one-to-one Android tablet deployment. And then adding on to that, this anytime, anywhere access, as Dallas mentioned, critically managed and controlled so that it was filtered and met all of the policy and school requirements of each local school as determined by those local schools and their individual policies. So creating that ubiquitous access environment, how did that then enable different practices from the teachers in engaging students, and also how did that enable the learning environment to be extended from the classroom to really create a learning environment in the home and outside of school hours and anywhere the students might be, and then collecting all that data back and using that for analysis.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. My good friend, Kathy Spencer, who I've had the absolute pleasure of knowing for many years, is the former superintendent at Onslow County Schools in North Carolina, where they have had a very successful mobile learning project for many years. So Kathy, tell us a little bit about what has been going on the last couple of years in Onslow County.
Super. And when we talk about many years, we started a smartphone initiative in 2007 with the help of Qualcomm and many other partners. And that was during a time, if you really think about it, people didn't have smartphones. And so that was a really big deal at that time to walk into a classroom and have students utilizing smartphones for Algebra 1 instruction. It was designed to look at increasing student content knowledge in algebra, but most importantly, what it did was helped drive students to be more engaged in mathematics, a field that many high school students are not engaged in. This is a southeastern coastal North Carolina community, very mobile because they are a military community, and students who do not always have access. It was a huge, huge success. We have continued that work. You heard some discussion earlier from Peggy Johnson about E-rate and the Learning on the Go project that the FCC did. We piggybacked our Project KNECT and worked with the FCC on that Learning on the Go project. It is one of the most important things in my career that I was a part of, and that was making sure that all students had an opportunity. And we're not there yet, but we do have the capacity. Things like E-rate and getting people in higher ed working together with teacher preparation, all of those things, we're there. We can get there. I believe in that.
Thank you, Kathy. Now, I mentioned noisy, messy, and I could see Bob's eyes were like, oh, yeah. Totally resonated with him. And Shirley already gave you a little bit of a forewarning of this, but Bob is with AAAS and has been doing a really innovative project called Active Explorers. So tell us a little bit about that, Bob.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned in some of these projects you don't know which side of the classroom is the front. Well, I'm like, what classroom? You know, you're just like, yeah, there is no classroom. So our project is called Active Explore. It's an app and a website. And our goal, and I think what we've done, is to actually bring sort of exploration into education. So as you know, Ronnie Lowenstein said, we're creating trying to create learning environments. I think that's really what we're attempting to do. So in science, we call this inquiry. So you're not listening to a lecture, you're not watching a video, you're not even playing a game, you're asking questions and you're exploring the world. So with Active Explore, educators, and they don't have to be teachers, it could be a parent, it could be a scout leader, anybody, build what we call quests, and then any student who has the Active Explorer app on their phone can join these quests. And the quests may ask them to take photographs of 5 living and 5 non-living things, or use the audio tool to interview the oldest member of your family and find out what technology was like in those days when they were kids. And they store what they've collected in their backpack, which is within the phone app tool. And then when they're done collecting, they download that to their website. And there they can analyze what they've collected and use what we call smart work tools to build comic strips, posters, ebooks, slide presentations that they can share with their peers and also share back to the leader, the educator who created the quest. And so, we now have this up on the Google Play Store. We have the first version, and we're sort of building out features to really, take advantage of how powerful mobile technology can be, again, for exploring as opposed to just for delivering information.
So as you can see, just from the first 3 we've talked about, very different projects in terms of the implementation and the focus. And that's one of the beauties of the Qualcomm Wireless Reach Initiative, is that it covers all sorts of different areas of what are some of the challenges, what are some of the barriers, what are some lessons learned. And so Elizabeth Foster is here from NICTAF because she's been involved with a very interesting project that goes to one of those issues that Shirley brought up about teacher preparation in terms of working with their project, T-Link. So tell us a little bit about that, Elizabeth.
Sure. Thank you. And first I'd like to say I'm just so excited to be in a room of people who are thinking about how to prepare future teachers for these new environments, because the work that we're doing in T-Link, which is teachers learning in networked communities, is all about sort of making sure that future teachers get a better understanding of the classrooms they will work in the future. So through our Wireless Reach grant over the past 2 years, we've been able to give faculty members and cohorts of future teachers tablets and smartphones with the intent of building their own professional learning networks and linking with their faculty members and cooperating teachers in the districts where they will teach, so that they can develop a better understanding of what will be expected of them in the future. And over the past year, we've come to realize that the faculty members, and especially the future teachers, need really specific guidance about what they will be expected to do, what the classrooms, we all talk about, you'll be in classrooms you can't even imagine yet. And imagine what that feels like if you're trying to prepare to be in that classroom that you can't even imagine yet. So we've taken some of our faculty members and student teachers on field trips to places like Onslow County so they can get a sense for what deep integration of mobile technology looks like. We've offered them a short course to experiment with apps and Twitter and online communities, and all the while giving faculty members and students face-to-face support and online support so they can have a safe space to experiment and reflect.
Which was one of the things that Dallas talked about, was having that safe environment for teachers to be able to explore. Well, I will tell you that all 4 of these projects that we're showcasing for you here today are all successful mobile learning projects. And there was a lot of fabulous lessons learned that we've been able to take out of it and share with many different people. But what I want to do is, I've got a couple questions for them. I want to pull a little bit more out of these experts that we have here, but then I've left some time for your questions too, so you can start thinking about those. So here's what I want to know up front for folks. Thinking about your individual projects, or thinking about the space you've been in terms of mobile learning, what do you think is that secret sauce to success? What do you think makes the difference? Because we know that lots of people are out there experimenting with mobile devices, but what makes it a successful project? Whoever would like to start.
I'll be glad to start.
Thanks, Kathy.
One of the things that we found was, and we made it a part of our strategic plan, was that it's all about the people. The secret sauce is in the people. It's in the room. And we tell our teachers that. We tell our parents that. We tell our students that. But with that comes a level of support that's necessary, resources, and I heard someone say, we can all act like that's not part of the conversation, but it is. It will always be part of the conversation. When you invest money in education, there is an expectation that comes with that. And as fast as the technology is changing, every investment we make in a school district, and I think my friend from Baltimore has left, but when you're making decisions about that $1.3 billion, somebody's going to ask the question, well, why are you changing? Why are you changing it? You've only been using it for 2 years. You're already changing. Resources will be part of the conversation. Ultimately, the human resource in my situation, in our project, was the most valuable piece. It was the piece, whether it was the human resource of the teacher delivering, the human, or if it was the parent who was supporting the teacher, who was stepping outside the box, who was giving that child a smartphone, which then gave them access to things that some of those parents had never seen in their life. And we're giving it to your 9th grader, your freshman just entering high school. That was a huge step. And in order to get everybody on the same page, you've got to have the people and that support. I will tell you, the project would have never gone to the level it has without the support and the people of Qualcomm. They have remained committed to education and using mobile devices, whether they're smartphones, tablets, it doesn't matter the device. It's the connectivity and the idea of what it brings to the table. So it's not just one person. When I say people, it's a wide span of people that make any project or any process successful.
And it probably should be noted that when Onslow County started, Kathy, we had just a couple of classrooms with a couple of teachers that, sure, they were some teachers that said, sure, I'll try something new. But now it's been expanded to all the math classes in all of the high schools in Onslow County, with an idea to moving that down to middle school next year. So not only building that case, but also sustaining it. Mm-hmm. So some other thoughts about secret sauce. I know you guys have some ideas. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that, the people and the people where we most have to deal with and meet the needs of are the educators. And often, I think, we build technology tools that are great and really useful, but completely unworkable for the teacher's particular situation. It doesn't serve. It's not. There's no pain that it's alleviating, as Chris was mentioning. So building a platform that allows the teachers to decide exactly what it is, the content itself. So we have sort of a content agnostic tool. So I know something about STEM and STEM education, and I may think this is the greatest thing ever. You need to have your kids looking at butterflies or whatever. And the teacher may say, no, what we need to do is look at something totally different, pill bugs or whatever we have in our environment. Or we're already doing this whole unit on this thing. I can't jump and do your topic and have it make any sense. So building a tool that is amenable to their needs rather than trying to make them amenable to what you have to offer is probably the most important thing.
And we've seen that in your project, that strong orientation to the local context, mm-hmm. to whatever that teacher's priorities are or the curriculum or what they're just trying to maybe even do some remediation on and get kids excited about learning is really a strong piece there. Elizabeth?
I would echo this theme about the people being really the secret sauce in what we're doing. I mean, for us, that personal support network, often face-to-face, but also online, has been really critical because as students are being asked to experiment with new technologies, they really need colleagues to say, everyone says this is so great. I'm looking at it, it's not useful to me. What are your thoughts? And then they build on that and have been able to share that with their faculty members. I will also say that our faculty members who have been involved in this project have been wonderful people and a wonderful, I don't know how to turn them into a secret sauce, but they've been a wonderful source of support for the students. And they have been willing to sort of flip this paradigm and say, okay, now we're learners too. Mm-hmm. I have never used Twitter before, but I'll give it a shot. You guys give it a shot with me. And that kind of modeling has really opened up the world for the student teachers.
I had the wonderful opportunity to visit one of T-Link's project sites this summer. I was down at Albany State University in Albany, Georgia, where there was a cohort of these teachers with their educators. And I also thought it was really impressive how the pre-service teachers were teaching each other.
Right.
So there, amongst any group of people, you'll have the folks that are really advanced in terms of technology, and some folks that are a little bit more reticent. And so that collaboration and that idea of working together on learning the technology is such a huge skill for teachers to think about going forward in general. In terms of collaborating with each other, it's almost like the technology was the Trojan horse in teaching those sort of collaboration skills. And so I thought that was really rich. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I definitely support the idea of culture. I certainly support that idea. And I think that part of what's underlying that culture that I see really drive success is this kind of embracing of versatility and experimentation. Is the mention about creating a learning environment where the teachers are willing to be active learners and model active learning at the same time is certainly very key. But I hear from a lot of different projects around the country and from our own project where we see that teachers and students and parents and administrators who come into this with an embracing that we don't have all the answers, but we're going to go in and we're going to find ways to use this that we've never done before. We're going to try practices we've never tried before. You see success. It is rare that you see somebody, you may hear a story about someone who is a very reluctant adopter who had a harder time generating the success that their peers had. But it's very rare that you hear somebody say, boy, this person was gung-ho on day one and they dove right in even though they didn't know anything and then they just couldn't figure it out. You don't hear that story. That's right. And so it's very interesting that a lot of the fears that we do see out there that we will see occasionally drive the reluctance to adopt in our existing community of adults, really more than students. That those fears can play themselves out if they're allowed to dominate. And the way that they don't dominate is usually with an overriding support from administration and from the community, and as Dallas mentioned, building this whole community culture around this is where we're going, this is where we have to go. And I think we have to remember that the traditional current system is not 100% successful. We're not ditching a method that was working for every kid and then moving to a new method. We're ditching a method that wasn't working for many kids. And we're looking for ways in which the new methodologies and the new tools will enable us to serve more kids in an even better way than we have in the past.
That's a wonderful way of putting that, Michael. I think this era of experimentation and trying to figure this all out that we're all involved with, I've been telling audiences lately, you may think this is funny, this mobile learning thing, it isn't Jell-O yet. It isn't firmed up. We're still kind of wiggly in terms of figuring out what it is. But you're right, having that buy-in, creating that culture, creating that self-environment, having the administrative support is something that's also really important. Now we know with any successful project, and as I queued up, these are all successful projects, you had to overcome some hurdles, you had to overcome some obstacles. There were some things along the road there that you didn't anticipate that sort of jumped up at you as a big boulder. Feel like sharing some of those and maybe some of the lessons learned from that?
We had no challenges at all.
None? It was all smooth sailing.
Yeah, me neither.
I actually think the culture issue has been a challenge for us in terms of working in higher education. The mobile learning piece is often seen as one person's interest or one department's particular inclination. And so we've worked hard to try to make sure we have support for innovation and using mobile technology across a broader spectrum of faculty members and administration. And it's been it's been, that's probably been our biggest challenge, I would say. Trying to make sure, we don't have the 2 special Qualcomm people within a whole department. I mean, there really needs to be broader support. And I think part of it is we started 7 years ago before there was, before this really seemed like a pressing issue for universities to deal with. But, we've been working hard on that issue, and we understand better how we need to go in and work with our partners from the beginning. So we've learned a lot there.
Okay.
I think that we have lots of speed bumps, but the one that probably rises high enough to practically be a roadblock, but hopefully not quite, is the need to balance child safety and privacy against the need to make the best use of the power of the technology and how those run up against each other. And I think the worst part about it is the communities and the districts that are best able to take care of that have the technology they need to do the whatever filtering is needed, the technology to keep those systems running, the parent buy-in for monitoring and to respond to the need to approve different uses of the technology. That's resident in the very communities that need it the least. Mm-hmm. And the communities that need the technology the most are the least able to deal with those 2 things. And that is a really tricky thing to overcome. And it's really beyond the application, the system that you create. It's part of the entire, the environment, the community, the ecosystem of education that we have. And hopefully that's improving, but right now it's still a big impediment.
Yeah, that's a really important lesson learned. We've seen that through several of the other projects that we've been working with as well, so that's important to bring up.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. I mean, probably the biggest things that we saw were both community culture based, and really have to praise the districts for a lot of their work in overcoming them. And they're very different between the 2 districts. So in Fairfax, we had a much higher level of digital literacy within the student and family population at the onset of the project. And one of the interesting hurdles that we ran into was about halfway through the school year, we got to Christmas. And a lot of the students, we think in part because of the excitement of using the mobile devices in the classroom, got new tablets for Christmas. And so now we had this challenge of, okay, well, now they've all got their own new personal tablets, which are even newer and better than the ones we gave them at the start of the year. And they want to use those. So how do we work within that? And at the same time, the innovation that was coming out of those students was very fast. So our legacy kind of adoption models for content and curriculum, looking at, at the start of the year or once or twice a year, are these acceptable or that acceptable? We had new apps that were coming out, every day almost from the application world. So how do you adjust fluidly to that? So that was kind of on the Fairfax side. And just really briefly on the Chicago side, the difference was more of a reluctance, a lower level of digital literacy within the community, and therefore some concerns and some fears that had to be overcome there. And the district took a very measured pace in rolling out the technology that helped address that. So a gradual of letting the students take home the devices 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, then all week, as well as multiple parent meetings. But in the end, really got the community on board. And they also put in some policies in place in terms of access and things like the network access outside of school, would shut off between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. because of the age of that particular group of students. They didn't want them to be staying up late and have that introduce a concern from the parents about the technology interfering with their home lives. So it was very interesting the way that the schools chose to address it, but really having the freedom to make those decisions within the school district that were specific to their community, rather than us going in and being prescriptive and saying, Fairfax, you should do it this way, in Chicago, you should also do the exact same thing. That would never have worked.
Yeah, that context is so important, and you know this so well, Michael. I think one of the things that was so interesting with this project last year in Chicago is that even though Chicago is a large endorser of mobile learning, to some extent they say they think they're the district that has had the most number of mobile devices the longest within the district. This project was the first project in Chicago Public Schools where the students could bring the devices home. So that was also a learning curve for the district in terms of thinking about how do we work that with the parents? How do you have those conversations that Kathy had, in 2007 with the parents in terms of what some of their concerns were. So that was a significant step forward in terms of thinking about how to, once again, contextualize to the actual needs of the community.
Absolutely.
Kathy?
I think probably it's not really a hurdle or obstacle to get started, but one of the things that we found was there are some challenges that come with success. I mentioned to you, Project KNEC began as a project for Algebra 1 students. So the first cohort of students coming out of that project were very, very successful in Algebra 1. Did not like math, were not supposed to be good math students, and were very successful. So when I went to visit them, their question to me was, what happens now? Because Algebra 1 is over. That was a really good question. And remember I told you how important the people are? The teachers piped up. We will take this cohort of students into honors geometry if you will let them keep their devices, let us continue the process, and we will build. We had no problem sets or curriculum developed or anything to utilize it. And they said, we'll build it. The teachers and the students, we will build it. That cohort of students kept devices through advanced placement statistics. These were students who weren't supposed to like mathematics. So you see, while it was a tremendous obstacle for us because we had to go back to Qualcomm and the group and say, look, I told them, I said, I can't take this away from them. They've come too far. They invested themselves in it. So the district, I had to go to my board. I said, look, we can't back out now. We've committed to this community. We've committed to these kids. We've got to keep going. We had to go, we went after $2.5 million from the Department of Defense and said, we need some dollars. We need some help. We need to keep this going. That's when we could expand. Mm-hmm. We needed to be able to offer. It wasn't fair for a small group to have access. All those 9th grade students needed access. All of those math students. So those are the kinds of challenges that can come with success because everybody found out, oh my gosh, the kids in those classes are doing great and look at what they're doing with mathematics now. Well, I want my child in that class. So, the phone calls start coming into the school. How do I get my child in that class?
Right.
So then you have to say, okay, well, let's open it up to all of the math classes. There are challenges with that. Are all of the teachers ready? We had some tremendous growing pains with that. But that is part of the success of projects, is being able to keep that momentum going and keep the process moving and eventually be able to have some sustainability. That is one of the other reasons why I have continued to advocate for E-rate and some of those things that will help with the sustainability of this kind of work.
Now, Kathy, I've got to tree off of something you said, because I bet if we polled the audience here about obstacles to mobile learning, most people here would say, well, what about teacher adoption? Are teachers reluctant? Are they holding back? Are they not interested in getting involved? Not interested in changing the way they do? And I know that like your initial cohort of teachers, as you're telling us this story, was eager to go on. But how did you then take it to this greater group of teachers so that it's now seamlessly integrated through all your high schools?
It's easy for me to stand up and say this is what you should be doing. But more important, when the other teachers can show you the benefit to their students, that meant more than anything I said. Now, I was there as their biggest cheerleader, but those teachers, and we talked about it, the mentoring and the modeling, and those teachers would say, look at what these kids accomplished. We even took that first year, we said, okay, the teacher who has the smartphones, she taught an Algebra 1 class with the smartphones and Algebra 1 without the smartphones. Mm-hmm. And we looked at the data, and it was powerful. And we shared that across the system with parents, with other teachers. So everybody understood that there was some value. wasn't just the device, but there was some value in the connectivity. That was the other thing. You know, we started off that project saying we want kids to be excited about math. We want to raise their math scores. We want them to take advanced math classes. What we didn't count on was that the kids would come back and tell us they were so engaged with each other. And when you talk about what the skills are we want kids to have when they leave, they were talking to each other about how they could all be successful in that math class. They were determined, because one of my goals to them when we started was 100% proficiency. You know, we have assessments. I want everybody proficient in Algebra 1 when we get to the end. They delivered. They helped each other. They collaborated at night, 11 o'clock at night. They're in there. I can't figure out how we did this. They'd shoot it to each other from a video they'd made so that they could help each other. That's the kind of thing we do in our jobs today when we're trying to collaborate across the ocean. We send that stuff back and forth. So I think that there's a lot of value that expands beyond just curriculum and those kinds of things.
So Kathy, you kind of teed us off here with my next question, which is, thinking about all these mobile learning projects, and the success that you've had, how do we replicate, how do we scale, how do we sustain these types of innovations? How do we make it so that every child has access to these type of things, or every teacher has access to this? So based on all of your experiences, what wisdom do you have to share with us about sustaining and scaling and replicating these fabulous projects?
Yeah, the elephant in the room when we start talking about resources and how does this all work. It's going to take everybody in the room coming together and figuring out how do we leverage all that we have. Because there are a lot of resources out there. We just got to figure out how to leverage them all. And things that we can change, not just education, because we have a tendency as a society to say, well, education needs to change. But as a society, we're not willing to make changes to help that process. So when we talk about, when Peggy started talking about things like the how E-rate got started. E-rate got started at a time many years ago when we weren't talking about mobile. And so now we're at a point where those kinds of things need to change to help us leverage the resources, to help us prepare teachers differently. There's all of these components that have to come together. So everybody's going to have to be willing to give a little bit and make those changes together, I think.
Some other thoughts?
I think we really need to be working towards second-order change. Mm-hmm. So we can't think of adding technology to what we already do today, and then we think as soon as we get into that thought process, we think of this is now going to be a supplemental budget line on top of our existing budget. And second-order change, I think, is really going to drive the efficiencies that we're looking for in other areas of our budget. So first-order change, just changing what we're already doing it more efficiently. Using the resources. Second order change, doing things we weren't able to do before. Mm-hmm. And one of the examples that came up was the question about global earlier, which is something I'm personally passionate about as well. But almost every story I've read from around the country where students have been really engaged in these online platforms, there is a story about them connecting with people around the world, in every one that I go to. And that's very interesting how that thread, is underlying, it weaves its way through all these different stories. That is the world our kids are growing up in. They perceive an increasingly global society, and they want to engage with that society, and it's something that they could not do without technology previously. So that is, I think, is very, very interesting, and it drives efficiencies. There's a book by Dr. Edwards over in the Carolinas as well, and Dr. Edwards is the superintendent at Mooresville, and he in his book has a couple of chapters that are just phenomenal. One of them talks about the budget question, and specifically talks about how they were able to move and transition to a very digital environment without any new money. And in fact, being one of the lowest funded districts in the state on a per pupil funding basis. And a lot of it was changing the ways they were already doing things. So for example, less physical field trips and more virtual field trips drove money. Getting rid of computer labs, converting those into classrooms, allowed them to delay building a new school, which huge capital cost offset. Just lots of things that all added up. And so I think that that's going to be one of the ways we address resources. Focus them on the things that really matter and not on anything that's extraneous and non-educational. And then consider the ways in which it changes the budget, not adds to the budget.
And I think Dallas was talking about that in terms of his budget conversion. I thought that
Absolutely.
was really interesting in what he was saying.
I was going to say, I love this question of scaling because it sort of was built into the project to begin with. And so the issues with scaling are cost, access, and content. And so we created something that it's free, so there's no cost barrier to anybody in the world using it today. We got some funds through Wireless Reach to do a Spanish language version to make it more accessible, so it will be in both English and Spanish. The content is self-generating, so the educators create the content, and everything they create, if they check share, their quest goes into a quest library where other people can use it. So we don't have to keep creating the content. And then the last impediment was that when we first created it, it was for Android phones only. And it's very hard to integrate that, especially if it's bring your own device and say, oh, but you kids that don't have Android phones can't do it. It wouldn't be very useful. So we got funds through the Verizon Foundation to create Android tablet, iPad and iPhone versions of it that are in production now. And so I think unless I'm missing something, I think it's now scalable pretty much many places of the world and pretty much in any community that wants to use it.
That's fabulous. And Elizabeth, thinking again about, this, and Shirley teed it up before with this sticky wicket, shall we say, of teacher preparatory programs. What do you think in terms of scaling up this new idea of pre-service teachers learning about using mobiles to collaborate with each other?
I think there are two aspects to it. I think one is that the faculty training piece, the working with faculty to understand how they're using mobile learning already, what they know about it, how they could integrate it into their course and their program, is a critical piece that we don't talk about as much as we should because it is a sticky wicket. And I think that what we've been talking about in terms of local context is absolutely critical because there are schools of education, there are residencies who are all about mobile learning and online communities and using your mobile device to experiment with different classroom management apps, or there are folks who are way ahead and early adopters, and then there are folks who are not. So I think understanding the context you're going into with any kind of effort is critical for scalability. And then I think what we've learned from T-Link over the years is, we started out thinking we'd give people mobile devices and they would just magically know what to do with them and how they could integrate them into their coursework and their residency work and their daily lives. And it's just not true. It's just not true. This was a long time ago. We've learned a little bit since then. But we also had assumptions that millennials, young student teachers, would automatically figure out how to do this. And they may be very mobile in their personal lives, but applying mobile learning to their professional development is a completely different ball of wax, as they say. So, you have to be sort of specific enough in what you want to accomplish and what you're looking for in your program of study, but allow that local context and experimentation. So in our course, we'll say, okay, the first week is about Twitter. Here's what it is. Here's why it could be relevant to your work. Here's some examples of how people are using it. Now go use it, see what you think of it, talk with your colleagues, come back and do a reflective, writing piece or a presentation about it. And that kind of specific enough so that you can dig your teeth into it, but authentic and experimental enough so that it's meaningful to you, I think is the key, both at the student level and the faculty level.
And that point that you made about the assumption that it just happens by magic is, I think, something that sort of resonates through all of the projects. I think we've all learned over the last couple of years that just making the devices available, even just making the connectivity available, doesn't mean that it leads to something that is meaningful and productive, and really addressing the question that Chris had, which is about transforming the learning process. It just does not happen by magic. So before I open it up to some questions, a couple closing things here. All of these projects are going to be featured on the Wireless Reach site, with our website, with some case studies that are currently being worked on. Some are already there, so you can go check that out. Other ones are currently in development, so that'll be the Wireless Reach website. In addition to that, some of these projects will also be featured at the Wireless Ed Tech Conference. If you are not familiar with that conference, Dr. Didi and I actually co-host that conference for the last couple of years. This year it's being held in Chicago, October 7th through the 9th. And again, we will be discussing a lot of the issues that we discussed here. In addition to that, talking more about the project, so you can learn more there as well. Okay, so what I want to do is open it up to the questions, but hold on a second, Bonnie. Hold on a second. I know a lot of you in the audience, and I know that you are all experts in many of these topics already. So what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of a suggestion. Rather than sharing your expertise with all of us, why don't we save that for the reception part? And why don't we try and keep questions to the audience, because I really want questions to the panel, because I really want you to pull more out of the panel than I was able to, and then save your comments for when we're chit-chatting afterwards. Sound fair enough? Okay, Bonnie.
Did you realize that in Belize they're using your program to teach? We were down on the floor of
Seriously?
They don't have books. And since they don't have books and they don't have, the fishermen use these devices to share in the villages where they don't have schools. Huh. And we haven't been able to go back, but I just thought that was something. How do we make that a bigger part of the program for developing countries?
You know what, and I think that when we built this, the idea was that probably its greatest use would be outside the classroom. It would be scientists who want to do citizen engagement programs and help them with their research. It would be scout leaders and people who, maybe are a little afraid of doing science and inquiry and that sort of thing, having an easy entree into it and be able to do, that sort of thing. And I hadn't thought of it, but even beyond kids using it, even people, just in villages using it for other things, I think there's applications in health, and in any time you need to gather data of any sort, collate it, and then share it back, I think you could use this. So I don't know how we make that more well-known, but we need to do that. Intentionally, right? Not accidentally, like it's happening now.
There's
right?
the answer.
Field trips.
There you go. There we go. Yes, in the back. Right there. I think there's a microphone. Anna has a microphone.
I hear a lot of talk about science and math, and I'm wondering if you see any applicability to this in the English classroom, history classroom, writing classroom.
Go ahead.
I'll jump right in on that one because absolutely, we have seen that. So just a couple of examples. We saw some tremendous unanticipated use of the technology in Fairfax in social studies and economics, areas like that, where students went out and did research that we did not predict. Even in Chicago, we had one particular unit that we drilled in on the research side to kind of look at what students were doing, which was a unit on Alaska that kind of exemplified the difference between the traditional model of teaching and what the technology was really enabling. The traditional model, what basically would have been a paragraph in the textbook about Alaska. And that would have been what all the students were taught uniformly, and they would have all essentially regurgitated back on the assessment later. And some particularly enterprising students might have gone and done some additional research on Alaska in the library. With the technology, when we went and looked at what the students actually did, and we were just looking at what they did after hours, off campus, on their own time via the technology, they actually went to over 30 different websites online to pull information about Alaska. And different students had different interests, which I think was really what was engaging for the students. We had students who were more artistically or visually cued, And they went and looked at wildlife photography, and they went and looked at art and things from that culture. And then we had other students who were much more data-oriented who went to the U.S. Census Bureau and pulled down demographic data, things like that. Also in Chicago, to your question about literacy, that was one of the areas they identified as a major benefit. They have a high population of English language learners in Chicago, and the technology had a much higher impact in that group than they expected, and now that has become a focus as we move into year 2 of this project. We're actually focusing on literacy, literature, reading, writing, and English language learning in the project in Chicago as well, because we saw so much more that we could do in that area just based on what was unexpected that came out of it in the first year. So yeah, absolutely, we're seeing tremendous opportunities outside of the traditional STEM fields.
Yeah, and I just want to say for Active Explorer, yes, it's useful for any topic. It's content agnostic, so I think it's just as useful for art and music and language arts as it is for science. And I think the more interesting thing, though, is it's useful for blending them. So you can go out and take, so the assignment is take pictures of 3 different flowers. And then the science assignment would be, how are they different? How are the structures different? And that sort of thing. The art story with that might be, let's draw a picture of them, or let's put them together into a composite scene. And the English language arts could be, okay, now you're doing a comic strip, and they're telling each other about themselves or their characters in a story. And you can use the comic strip tool to create a little story based on what you collected. And that's, there's any number of combinations, so it could be used for any topic or any topic in combination.
I would just add, I wish I had mentioned this in the beginning, but the teachers that we work with, the student teachers we work with, are not STEM teachers. They're all across the disciplines, and actually in the pilot program we did at Albany State, they're special education residents.
And I think when we started our project in the Algebra 1 classes, the students were not confined to using their smartphones just in Algebra 1 class. So when they went to English class, they had them. More importantly, and I think this was the big thing, when students went home, and if they didn't have high-speed internet access, they still had connectivity. They would write messages to their cohorts. They would speak because they did videos. And so they developed not just reading skills, but they developed writing skills, speaking skills, so that when they had to come at the end of their senior year and do a presentation for a graduation project, they were very comfortable speaking to others because they had developed those skills. That's what they'd been doing since 9th grade through their devices and their collaborative environments.
And if I could,
interpersonal and intrapersonal skills that Chris talked about before.
Yeah, and just adding one little bit to that, because I did a site visit actually to Onslow. I don't know if you remember me coming by, but I did a site visit to Onslow, and at the time it was very focused on math as the place where it was being specifically, intentionally implemented at the time. But we had an opportunity to sit in the lunchroom with a group of students, and the students had just come out of a history class, and so they had been talking about some topic in history, and what they were remarking on was that they basically had pulled their smartphone out of their pocket, and they were continuing to look things up online on the smartphone and continue their dialogue on this topic while they were in the lunch line. So they're actually walking through the lunch line, and they're continuing their dialogue on this subject matter, researching as they go. And when I sat down at the table with them, I asked them about this experience, and they had actually been actively engaged by Onslow, the students, in evaluating which devices were the best devices to use. And this was one of those situations where they said, in the case of this mobile device, it allowed us to continue that dialogue, where we could not have done that. We wouldn't have been standing in the lunch line and popped open our laptop and plugged in a search while we're walking through the lunch line. Some of us have tried to do that in this room, to walk and use a laptop at the same time. But with their mobile device, they actually just pulled it out and they continued the conversation and they looked something up, and it didn't interrupt the flow along this academic line, even though it wasn't the intention originally to use in that subject.
Okay, I think there was, yes, sir, right here.
Hi, thank you. Jonathan Levy. I'm one of the program officers of the Education Technology Program at the Institute of Education Sciences. And we're particularly interested in improvements to the educational system that result in learning gains. And the recurring theme of all the panelists is that by providing technology through assessments and tools and individualized learning, that there will be learning. And implicit, it seems to me, is that learning will be better with technology than without. So I'm wondering if the panelists can mention any sort of specific results they may have showing improvements in the technology condition versus the non. I know Dr. Spencer mentioned the Algebra 1 and the AP class increased participation. I'm wondering what were the results, better past performance on the AP exams, and likewise for the other panel members.
And I don't have all my numbers, but if you want to go to the Onslow County Schools website, they can show it to you. I will tell you that the Project KNET classrooms have historically, over the past 7 years, overperformed above any of the other classrooms. They've overperformed across state scores. The first group, it was huge. I mean, we were talking about 98 to 100% proficiency on state Algebra 1 tests with students that we did not want to be engaged in mathematics. And so it has had some very strong both academic impacts as well as engagement impacts. And I think one of the more big picture, and we go back to the teacher preparation stuff, the teachers now will tell you, I cannot go back and teach the way I used to teach. Now, what that means is that they now understand that the students come to us at a different place. If we are not meeting students the way they come to us, they are not staying. And across this country, we have students who are not staying engaged in our schools. And so I will tell you, one of the things I have shared very loudly with my Board of Education before I threw in my towel was that our graduation rate over the past 5 years has continually climbed. When I left, we were at 86 to 87% graduation rate. And that was higher than our state graduation rate. And we attribute that to meeting students where they are with what they need. And it crossed over. It didn't stay in the math classroom. Now it's in the other classrooms. And that's part of where I think we have to go. I'm not telling you we're there 100%, but I'm telling you we have made great strides. And to me, the bigger picture is, how do we do that across the country? Not just in Onslow County, but we have an obligation to do this in every school system in this country because we want it for everybody.
Right. In addition to getting the data from Kathy's website, if you go to tomorrow.org, which is the project Tomorrow that I'm part of, we did the early evaluation work on that, and all those statistics are in the full reports.
It's just been,
website.
We're talking about 7 years worth of data, and I would hate to start spouting off data and somebody come back and go, that wasn't right. It was probably the wrong year. I just can't keep them all together, but it's all there on the web.
Okay, we're going to do one more question, and then we have our all-important reception.
I won't delay folks from getting to the reception for too long. So my question is actually
Your name, please?
Shaba Lightfoot, and I'm actually representing the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. We're located in Alexandria, Virginia. So my question is two-part in nature. The first part being, and some of the panelists have touched on this topic, it's expected that everyone is going to gain from having mobile access in the classrooms. However, we know that everyone has different learning speeds. So if someone perhaps needs a little extra help or something like that, and typically in perhaps an older platform, they may have been able to go to a writing center or a math center or some way to get some sort of tutoring. So I guess the first question is, what ways are you able to implement through those avenues so that they're kind of up to speed in being able to help with this newfound technology? So that's the first part. The second part is there any concern of creating divide amongst the parents at home? Again, we know that learning is best if it happens both in the classroom and at home. So is there any concern of perhaps creating a disconnect with the home if you have this newfound technology that you're able to use, but wait, my parents don't know how to use it, so am I going to be able to connect with them the same way I would have when I was pulling out a textbook? So those are my two questions.
Anybody want to jump in?
I will be glad to touch base on the parent part of that, just because we did a lot of work. Not just the school system, the Qualcomm organization came down. We had our community leaders, and we brought everybody to the table, and we said, this is what the technology looks like. This is what it will do. This is what the project does. We engaged everyone. The parents came and signed off and participated. They had to participate in that work prior to the students even beginning. So having those conversations, when I talked about the people being so important to the success, it's because the parents, everybody knew exactly where we were going and how we were going to get there. And I think it's critical. Otherwise, you could very easily set people aside.
I think the divide it's more of an opportunity than a problem, because there's very few areas where the kid can be empowered. And I think this is an area where the kid says, hey, let me show you how to do this. And the parents will readily agree to be tutored by their 10, 11-year-old kid on the use of the new technology. And I think that's a very powerful moment for the kid, and useful for the parent as well. And also, it's sort of a paradigm for the way learning happens. It learns, you learn together. You don't turn to the expert to tell you the answer. And in this case, the parent doesn't know the answer, and the kid can actually be empowered to do that. So I think it's a nice opportunity. And it may not happen for that long, because as over the years, parents are going to get more savvy. But now it's a unique opportunity.
I think what Julie said earlier about technology is sometimes the Trojan horse that facilitates a different kind of learning environment is exactly right. That this is an opportunity, as you're saying, for everyone to come together and say, okay, what's the new way we're doing this now? And as a parent of a 10-year-old, I have been through this a lot so far this year, and it is a good equalizer. So.
And we have definitely seen an increase in parental engagement, specifically was cited as results coming out of Chicago, where in many of those families, this was the first computing device to come into the home, the first internet connection to come into the home. And so it definitely opened up opportunities, not just for the child, but for the parent. I don't think we'll ever eliminate kind of generational gaps in skills and knowledge, whether that's a parent not understanding how to support their child in Algebra 2, or Algebra 1, or whether it's a parent asking their child, in the previous generation, how to program the VCR clock. The children will always be a step ahead with the newer technology. I live in a technology world, and my 9-year-old discovers things that I simply don't have time to be out researching, and then he teaches me. And that learning environment, I think, is incredibly important. And the learning environment being extended into the home is really critical to adding to additional educational time to our children's day. And the degree to which that can be a co-learning environment with their parents, I think, is even more powerful. And I think that having the devices and having the access out there does that.
Thank you. Well, before I dismiss you for the reception, I want to, of course, thank our hosts here at Brookings and Daryl West for this fabulous forum here this afternoon. I know that I have learned quite a lot, even from my friends that were up here and on the first panel. And so I'm sure you have too. I hope we've stimulated some new ideas, maybe stimulated some further questions. That's the purpose of the reception. So then you can take those ideas, you can continue these interesting conversations. But before I dismiss you, please thank my panelists for sharing their wonderful insights with us.